Oh, I off.
All right, everyone. So we have another guest this time. This is George Griffin, animator, artist, anything else. You want to introduce yourself maybe to my students? Say a little about yourself and what you consider yourself in terms of
Oh,
as
all right.
animator.
Well, I'm in my 80s. I haven't turned 80 yet, but I'm a geezer.
Sure.
And I came to New York from Tennessee, where I grew up, and thought I was going to work in government. But I had friends who were going to the NYU Film School, and I hung around and audited and helped them make their films. And then I thought, gee, I've drawn all my life. I want to be an animator. And so I learned by teaching myself, but also I got a job in a studio, in a commercial cell animation studio. And that made a big imprint on me. I learned how to do everything except direct and actually animate. I did that on my own. But I was what's called an in-betweener. So I flipped the drawings and see how they were moving.
Right.
And that was a primal kind of activity. And I still am, I can't make a living at it now, but I did then. And I was also independent and somewhat experimental. I hate that word.
Sure.
But so I rode the road on both sides of on the left and the right. So I got honked at a lot of times, whether it was in England or in America. It was on the wrong side of the road, no matter what.
So what got you kind of interested in animation to begin with? Since it seemed like you were going towards government and then you kind of hard turned into
No, I never had any art courses, so I never knew how to even draw. I drew from my childhood, and my father was actually a cartoonist when he was a teenager. So, but comic books were not encouraged. And I have to say, I kind of did it surreptitiously, the animation part and the comic book part, cartoons. They were considered lowbrow stuff.
Right.
But so what was the question again?
Just what you kind of got you into the world of animation, or what you want to be part of it,
No, I just wanted to, I saw certain animators work. I mean, we all know Disney, we all knew the golden age of cartoons. I didn't know who actually made them.
Right.
But I learned, and that became the canon. And then you go around and you shoot your own guns at the canon. So you try to, make waves within what was established. So I saw there were animators like Robert Breer, and even people like Stan Brakhage, not really an animator, but he could just turn the camera on anything and click a click away with the Bolex. And that was very interesting stuff compared to, figures doing, happy things.
Right.
I found out that you could sort of break that apart and tear up the drawings. And that was very appealing to me. But at the same time, I can make a living at making those drawings and making them move.
Sure.
So it seemed like you could be kind of schizoid, and you can do both at the same time.
So I know you started off kind of more in the commercial. You said on your website you started off was Fritz the Cat where you kind of started, or maybe
I got a job after my 1-year apprenticeship at this company that made animated commercials, basically.
Oh, okay. Sure.
Then I did a little freelance here and there. I could do tweening. I could even do animating. And then Bakshi had a studio on West 57th Street, and it turns out he needed some people to work on Fritz the Cat. I got hired. I worked for a month. I was an in-betweener, an assistant for a lot of, really Marty Terrace, old time guys, and it was great. But then Ralph fired me because my drawings weren't really that good. They were too wiggly and erased up, and I loved Crumb. So I thought that the design people weren't really doing the right thing by him. So the fact that I got fired didn't matter that much to me. But it wasn't even a beginning for me, see.
Oh,
But
okay.
it gave me a sense that you're not going to work in the big, studios that do, perfect cartoon animation. But I did freelance at other places doing assistant work, commercial places. So it was good to have the experience working in, even for just 1 month.
Sure, I understand. So, you started off kind of in the more traditional kind of animation studios,
Right.
but then you sort of go off and sort of make your own work, right?
That's right.
You want to talk a little bit about that, or
My own work.
yeah, you
Or
sort of
going off
experimental or whatever you want to call it, alternative, or whatever new label they come up with, like.
I didn't fly away from one to the other. It was important to have both hands active. I even know some animators or some designers, cartoonists work with their wrong hand to get the certain look. And my friend Kathy Rose, a great animator, she drew a whole film in which she had the drawings upside down. She drew the characters upside down. So the idea of keeping both hands active is important to me. It was particularly then. I had a style of work that was a little bit loose in my illustration style. So certain advertisements were allowed that kind of look to come in at the time I was starting out, the late 60s, early 70s. I mean, my first film was an independent film after experimenting a lot. I finally finished one. I made it with dried beans. And I had my camera on a stand, and I just moved them around and took frames, and I made them turn into abstract designs, and sometimes it turned into faces, and they would do like this. So I did 2 little films like that. So I started out doing experimental stuff. After I found out that I could make a living as a freelancer, it was the next step to just sort of, after I'd made my own films, to get a job producing something for TV. And that would either be an opening title sequence or even a commercial or a public service spot. I could do the whole thing because I had a animation stand. That's an important factor. So I could do the drawing and the coloring, have a little staff, and I could have it shot, or I could shoot it on my own camera, take it to the lab. They turn it into video or just keep it as film for the client. This is a long time ago.
Sure. Yeah. So, well, I was going to say, I mean, technology aside, because I think that technology has changed, but do you have any advice for my students who, let's say they want to do sort of, non-traditional experimental, they're not worried about, making something for Pixar or something. Do you have any advice for them on your process, or what you learned, or what you, after years of doing it, what you found out or got out of it,
Well, I climbed the tree. I maybe fell off a few limbs, but I was climbing on the tree with film and sprockets. And I like technology. I like how things worked. I understood how those things worked, the film technology. When it came to the computer, that changed everything, because as it turns out, I found that I could make a whole film that ended up as a digital file, a digital film, using Photoshop and After Effects, still 2D. I never made the step into 3D. I think if I'd been working with puppets or working with something that had some kind of 3 dimensions to it, this would be an obvious step that I would have taken. I never went there. So younger people coming into it, if they want a job, it probably would be in a 3D CGI kind of place. Sure. There are studios, I'm sure, that still are known for 2D, for drawing, for painting, it looks like it's flat stuff. And if, younger people if that's their strength, then go with that. And that could be done digitally or, people are even going back to film now. I wouldn't say animation people, but a lot of filmmakers at schools, they like to use that sprocketed medium.
Interesting.
It's weird. I don't know. I would never do it myself, but
Sure.
things changed for me when I already was using Photoshop, but After Effects and Photoshop, that was a marriage made in heaven. And the end product was a digital file. When video much earlier, became the end product, it was lousy. It was analog video. I hated the way it looked. So I didn't have anything to do with video, but it was analog. So I'm not sure if that really answered. How could I tell a student?
I guess my question was really sort of along the lines of people who might be interested in just kind of making their own work.
Right.
Not necessarily building something for a reel to show for a job, but someone who just, let's say I have a student and they like animating, but they don't want to necessarily have a job in it in the traditional sense. But they want to produce work because you produced a lot of your own sort of, alternative work, which unless you got, I'm not sure if you got grants for them. Or not,
Well, I got grants.
Oh, okay.
Even without the grants, I would have to get a job somewhere to pay the rent in New York.
Sure.
This is not Tennessee. It's not New Jersey. This is living in it's a utopia, but it has a lot of problems.
Sure.
And paying the rent is a big one.
Sure.
Probably the biggest. So, but doing your own work, of course, it's art. Can you sell the art? Maybe, but it could get you a job teaching. No, but I think one of the things is trying to figure out what you could play with it, and playing will give you it has a lot of educational value. You could make mistakes, and sometimes they look great. And professionals will say, gee, how'd you do that? How'd you get that? It's an effect.
Right.
It's like, dropping the first, the bowl of whatever it is, a bowl of soup, and you look at it and say, oh my God, that's great. I should have put it this way and not that way.
Right.
So mistakes, and also stealing ideas. I think Picasso said that it depends on who you steal from.
If you're going to steal from the best.
The best. And you can tell people.
Right.
For me, technology was pretty important, but not nearly as important as the picture you made. So that, as I say, I never had any real formal training drawing, but I found out that people could teach me things technically. And so I could see what an animation stand could do. And I either bought one or I built one. So I sort of saw what a professional camera operator, cameraman, they were called then. It doesn't matter. Anybody could run a camera. But just knowing the processes was important. I actually taught a year at Harvard, and they had an Oxbury stand, which is at that time the top of the line, but a huge, weighed a ton. And yet the teacher before me set up Bolexes in little alcoves for students to go in there and do some practicing or do some sort of experimenting. And I found that was the best place that they could learn, not use the big imposing machine that. So that was my idea for teaching was, don't worry about the Oxbury, get with the copy stand and use your Bolex or whatever you happen to have. That's where you learn. You either make the drawings in a sequence or just use stuff under the camera and see about, moving it, holding it a few frames, moving it some more. And then you leave your hand in the frame. It's a big accident. Oh my God. But then you see other films of filmmakers. Oh my God, there's their hand. Oh my God, the hand is staying there and doing something. Oh, wait a minute. it's moving funny. That hand is moving funny. It has 3 fingers. So anything is possible.
Sure.
That's what you
Well, I
have.
think what it sounds like you're saying is really just to experiment, try different things, try it on a small scale. Is that kind of fair to
Yeah,
say?
that's it. Try anything. And even when it doesn't seem to work, but then you look at the results again, you think, gee, maybe if I take that mistake and then embroidery, sort of fluff it out and go to another chapter and,
Sure.
and see how that works. I also find that writing is important with just regular words.
Okay.
So when you see something that you have done or somebody else has done, writing down notes in a page with a pencil or a pen, that can be helpful. It could turn into a script.
So in other words, like you're talking about like seeing something in another animation or a movie and kind of
In another movie,
Okay.
or any seeing something on the street
Sure.
that is not media, but writing it down. And if you have a notebook, it can be helpful. I'm losing my memory, just to tell you. So notebooks are really important to keep me, up to pace. But I think even a young person could benefit from having a place to jot down stuff. Or I forgot to put this on mute. Of course, this is so important. You can take the notes here. I gotta mute it now in case somebody tries to get in touch.
One thing I was kind of interested, one part of your work was known as the anti-cartoon. I wasn't quite sure what you meant by that. What is it? What do you call how do you define an anti-cartoon?
It's an attitude, it's a point of view that would let you stand back from the golden age, whether it's Disney or Warner's, and say, okay, that was then. I am doing something now that's going to break the rules. Okay. I'm going to be opposed to that, but anti-cartoon is really too strong a word. And so I wrote this when I was a young person in the 70s, and I was really, anti-cartoon, that I'm doing something that's more experimental, and it's rough, and it's personal.
Right.
It's about me and my friends, or, so and people who were doing regular cartoon animation said, oh, you're nothing, you're nothing. So I got angry at them. So it was sort of like this belligerent point of view. About 20 years ago, I felt that was too much. So I wrote another essay that was anti-cartoon.
Okay.
I see a way to mesh the two. So the term anti-cartoon sort of stuck. And I'm,
When you say breaking the rules, what rules do you think you were breaking at that point?
Oh, well, the smooth character moving.
I see.
And jerky, the line being perfect, the character maintaining its consistency, its character. If you're drawing with a shaky line and you have scratchy points where you've done tests, the pencil test. I love pencil tests.
Sure.
And that's one of the reasons I got fired by Bakshi. My pencil tests were not cleaned up well enough. I said, well, it looks more like crumb, doesn't it?
Well, it's funny because, if you look back at different, like when I watch a lot of cartoons, and I can always tell what decade the cartoon was done in by the visual. Like I can't necessarily always describe it, but like if I watch, say, Pink Panther had a certain minimalism to it that was very different than what like Warner Brothers was doing in like the 30s or the 40s versus, Disney always was like super meticulous and it's rendering. But then you went to the 60s where everything was almost deliberately abstracted, and it was kind of
UPA did that, and that was an interesting move. It became, it was hard edge, but it was simple. It was modern looking. And then John Hubley came to New York. Now, he was a UPA guy, and there are other people who changed, so they didn't continue the style. I was lucky to have gotten a gig or job doing a storyboard for Hubley. Mm-hmm. And it was fascinating. He gave me a sort of a sketchy board that he got from an agency. And I took it home and really roughed it out. He said, just, make it so it has chapters and scenes and make it work. I brought back my storyboard. This is before I really had done much with animation. And I did the drawings in ink with a Croquill pen, mind you, and about 20 drawings and with the script underneath each drawing. And he said, oh, this is pretty good. And he put the drawings out on the table and he said, we don't need that one. Oh, that's no good. He threw away about half the drawings and he moved them around.
Sure.
And I thought, oh my God, he's editing my drawings. He is throwing out half of them. And he said, that's it. That's a storyboard now. Now I'll learn from him. And that was, by having him basically dump on what I had done. So that was a really good experience. But yeah, and later in the 70s, you saw R.O. Bleckman, you saw illustrators who had a style, brushy, wiggly, and that became okay to use that as a design for cartoons, even commercial stuff. So there were some commercials that really were kind of breaking the rules. Sure. And it bled out into all kinds of fields.
So I'm trying to say this on the behalf of my students. So my students have taken like a very basic, animation class.
Bouncing ball,
sacks of flour falling, basic walk cycle,
Yeah.
Let's say they're interested in making cartoons, but they don't know where to go after this, because this is just one class. It's not like a degree like RISD would have where it like goes through the whole thing. What would be your advice to someone who wants to just continue making animations, but they're not sure what to do at this point? You know what I mean? Does that make sense as a question?
Make sure what to do.
Like what would you tell them? Like someone says, okay, I know the basics. I can animate a basic, some basic stuff. They've done a couple of storyboards. They want to continue making animation, but they're not sure what the next step is. Do you have any advice or
making it move is one thing. Designing it is something else. That's what you do with the board, and that's a special thing. Sort of directing. How long does this stay? Is the camera moving? Is the figure moving? How do you want to represent that?
Right.
When it comes to getting a job in a studio that is doing CGI, I have no advice for that.
Sure.
I would not know how to begin. But just to do, getting the story down in let's call it panels, and knowing how you can tell a story with different panels that can have part of your figures, your characters. How do the characters express themselves? Do they express emotion with their body and their face?
Sure.
And if you think about lighting, how you want to put on shadowy things.
Sure.
But yeah, walking into a studio and showing your stuff and getting hired,
right. No,
it's pretty hard.
I think what I'm getting from you is, I think what you're trying to say to a certain degree is talking about the body language and the expression of the characters.
Right. Exactly.
Whether it's an animation or a storyboard or even a single drawing, the staging of it and the I can't think of the right term right now, but just the posing. I always tell my students, like, animation's all about over exaggeration of everything. It's like, if I was drinking, normally I drink like this. If I'm in a cartoon, it's like, you put your body language in a way that like no one really does that. But it's like,
but of course,
you're playing around with the movement because that's the point, right? Like
exaggeration. Right.
Exaggeration, yeah.
And yet, what's also interesting in that movement you did, it would be also effective to think about someone looking at that person making that movement, like with disgust or with Oh,
Right.
I'm
Some sort of
amazed.
reaction. Yeah.
Reactions. So reaction shots, that's something you get in any kind of movie.
Sure.
Uh, and being able and drawing the character at beginning and the end of and in between, not so much in between, the beginning and end are important. I'm going to show you a picture of something. I drew it a long time ago. I just happened to run across it because I'm doing my website now. And this is a guy doing in-betweens, and he is flipping to see how the animation works. That's what I did. So when I went in to the studio, they said, sure, you can be an animator. First, you start here making in-between drawings.
Sure.
I learned that that's ridiculous. You can see how it's going to be moving through space. But if you're doing your own film, you want to see how it starts and ends, and where else it can go, even without humbly looking down your back. I think showing somebody what you do, either it's a portfolio of drawings, or if you've been able to make something that's an experiment, I think those are two things that need to be focused on when a person is trying to sell themselves, design and ideas of movement.
Yeah, great.
Pretty general way of putting it, but
yeah, sometimes simple is best.
Well, I mean, there are people, this whole new system of the digital world, I mean, people could just put their stuff on YouTube and there it is. And you don't have to walk into a studio and say, here I am, look at me.
Right. So with us kind of ending this interview, where do you see animation going, or where do you want to see it go? Either from a storytelling point of view, or what it is, or, you know, not necessarily like the style necessarily, it could be that, but like, where would you like to see animation go?
Oh, animation, it's going to go all over. It's gone over the world already.
Sure.
I'm in many ways, I'm going backwards, back to flip books, back to machines before cinema, and just having fun doing a flippering around. And that's not the future, though. That's really, I'm dwelling on the past. It's pretty hard to say. I think a lot of it has to do with the issues you might be dealing with, not technology, not even design, but what is the ideas that are motivating you. I think you'll find the design once you know what it is. You're telling a story, you have a political point of view, you have a social point of view, write it down, get it going, and you'll see things will fall into place. I don't know about the future. I really can't. That's a bad question for me.
Right.
I barely understand where I am now. But going to festivals, you do see an awful lot. And they're not in this country. You've got to go other countries, Japan and Europe and all over, to see what people throughout the world are bringing into these locations. Go to Ottawa, see the festival up there. And you see it, but then do you want to imitate that? You want to think about if you like that or follow it, or just make up your own route. I just can't imagine where things are going.
That's what's fun about animation. It's always kind of expanding, and it goes everywhere. I think that's what draws people to animation, is it's kind of the closest thing we have to magic, where kind of anything is really possible. You know what
Absolutely, I mean? Absolutely. And it's a miracle when you can flip something like a flip book and you see it come to life. This is what God did. He animated human beings. So I still do these guys, so there's the animation. It's right there. You can see it.
Right.
From the very beginning.
Sort of see it, yeah.
I would go back any day, but that's just the enchantment of animation. It's enchantment.
It is enchantment. I think that's a good place to stop. So I think my students and I would like to thank you, George Griffin, for spending your time with us. And I'm sure
Thank
everyone
them.
learned a
And you
lot.
can edit whatever you want. Just throw it out, all the ers and ahs and all that stuff. But thank you for talking and thank you for listening.
We appreciate it.